What if I told you the secret to great leadership isn't what we think it is? It's not about copying success stories, it's actually about mastering failure. In this explainer, we're diving into the book, The Wisdom of Failure, to figure out how to learn the toughest lessons in leadership without having to pay the ultimate price. Okay, first up, we've got to get our heads around this core problem that every single leader runs into. The authors call it the failure paradox. So let's just start with the big question. How do great leaders actually become great? If you're like most of us, you were probably taught to study their wins, right? To copy their successful habits. But that's really only looking at half the picture. The deepest, most important lessons in leadership, they almost never come from a winning streak. They're usually born from something way more uncomfortable, like making a really bad call. And look, this isn't just some abstract idea. A.G. Lofley, the guy who used to run Procter & Gamble, he literally called his failures gifts because of how much they forced him to grow. It's a pretty powerful thought. The biggest lessons come from the toughest losses, not the easy wins. And this right here, this brings us to the central dilemma. This is the failure paradox. To be a great leader, you have to learn from mistakes. But in the real world, you can only mess up so many times before your career is over. It's this incredibly high-stakes tightrope you have to walk. So how in the world do you do it? To really see this paradox in action, let's look at an amazing real-world story. It's a tale of two CEOs. They started on almost the exact same path, but their stories ended in completely different universes. So, meet Ken Lay from Enron and Jim Owens from Caterpillar. What's absolutely fascinating here is how similar they were. I mean, both grew up without a lot of money, both got PhDs in economics, and both climbed all the way to the top to become CEO of a huge Fortune 500 company. On paper, they were practically twins. But one single fundamental difference in how they led sent them down two totally opposite paths. And it all came down to one thing: how they handled mistakes. And you can see the two paths right here. When things started going wrong at Enron, Ken Lay's approach was to hide the mistakes, to sweep them under the rug. The result? Total catastrophe. But Jim Owens did the exact opposite. Early in his career, he carefully studied all the mistakes Caterpillar had made during a recession. Years later, when he was CEO during the 2008 crisis, he used those very lessons to steer the ship safely. The difference is it's stark. One guy ran from failure, the other became its best student. Okay, so now that we've seen just how high the stakes are, let's actually break down what leadership failure looks like. The research basically sorts it into three big categories. You can think of it like this. Failures happen at three different levels. You've got the big picture, organizational level, then you have the ground level, team-by-team stuff, and then you have failures that happen right inside the leader's own head. So first, at the highest level, you have unbalanced orchestration. This is a huge strategic mistake. The classic example is when a company puts efficiency way ahead of effectiveness. And the perfect, painful example is Circuit City. They fired their best, most knowledgeable salespeople just to cut payroll costs. Sure, it looked efficient on a spreadsheet, but it absolutely destroyed their effectiveness because they drove away the very customers who wanted that expert advice. Next, we zoom into the team level with drama management. And this isn't always about a boss who yells and screams. It can be way more subtle. You've got something called dysfunctional harmony, which is where everyone's so afraid of conflict that bad ideas never get challenged. Or you get distracted purpose, where leaders actually encourage teams to compete against each other, making them forget who the real competition is, the one outside the building. And finally, we get to personality issues. This is when a leader's own ego just gets in the way. And whoa, the numbers here are pretty shocking. Think about this. Almost half of all managers admit to hoarding power instead of trusting their teams. But even more telling, a full 70% of leaders agree that being self-absorbed, making it all about them, is the absolute worst mistake a leader can make. All right, so we've spent some time diagnosing the problems. Now for the good part, the solution. How do you actually learn all these lessons without having to crash and burn yourself? Well, it all starts with understanding one really crucial difference. First, there's effectiveness. This is all about doing the right things. It's about your big picture strategy, making sure you're actually pointed in the right direction. Efficiency, on the other hand, is about doing things right. It's about taking something you're already doing and making it faster or cheaper. So effectiveness is your direction, efficiency is just your speed. And here is the absolute game changer. Great leaders focus on being effective before they worry about being efficient. So many leaders get this backward, probably because efficiency is just easier to measure. But think about it. Becoming the most efficient company in the world at making something nobody wants is just a really fast way to go out of business. So here is your practical how not to toolkit. Each one of these is a direct antidote to the failures we just talked about. Instead of that unbalanced orchestration, define yourself by the value you create, not the thing you sell. To fight drama management, you've got to encourage healthy debate, not fake harmony. And to avoid those personality issues, stop hoarding power and start empowering your people to become leaders themselves. We're going to wrap all this up now by focusing on the single biggest blind spot, the one thing that kind of ties all of these failures together. You know, I absolutely love this quote from George Rubinson, the retired president of Allstate. It just captures the danger of ego perfectly. The second a leader feels like they have to remind everyone how important they are, they've already lost. Real authority doesn't have to announce itself. And that's really the heart of it all. The goal isn't to be a perfect, flawless leader, because let's be real, that person doesn't exist. The real goal is to become a flawless student of failure, learning from your own mistakes and maybe even more importantly, from the mistakes of others. That right there is the wisdom of failure. It's a roadmap of all the potholes to avoid so you can focus on what really matters. So I'll just leave it with this one question to think about. What mistake, whether it's yours or somebody else's, are you going to learn from today? Thanks for joining me.